1.2 Form, Volume, Mass, and Texture. So in this chapter, we're really dealing with three-dimensional works, and I mentioned before about shape being strictly, not exactly, but it's much more referring to two-dimensional things like drawing and painting. You get into three-dimensional work, you're going to have height, width, and depth. And if you ever have a question about it, when you're looking at works in the book, if you just see height and width, then you know that's two-dimensional work. So literally 1, 2. 1, 2, 3 is 3 dimensions. Height is 1 dimension, width is another. Depth is when you get into your third dimension, which means a sculpture or, building, that kind of thing. Okay? So these elements, form, volume, mass, and texture, are more to do with a three-dimensional form. Form, if we were thinking about two-dimensional pieces, you would use the word shape. Okay? And texture, you would use pattern. Now there are implied textures and implied mass and implied volume in painting. But what we're going to talk about right now is actual and a little bit about implied. So a two-dimensional object has shapes, or is a shape, depending on what we're talking about. Three-dimensional object is called a form. So a form has to have two basic attributes: volume, the amount of space it occupies, and mass. Okay, the volume is solid and occupies space. You think about a body as a form, if that makes sense. And we use that interchangeably sometimes. Okay, the Great Sphinx of Giza, great example, awesome photograph, by the way. And don't get confused, too, because you're looking at photographs of everything in the book. There's nothing in the book, hardly, that isn't a photograph of something. Sometimes it is the photograph, sometimes it is the work. You really want to look at your descriptions. We don't really focus too much on photography in this book, but this is a photo of the Sphinx here. It's got a lot of other stuff in it, which is amazing, and the clouds look beautiful and so on, but this is a photograph of a sculpture, and this is the largest sculpture out of a single piece of stone in the world. There are perhaps other larger sculptures out of multiple pieces of stone or other materials, but this is one single piece of stone. So it's an example of a regulated geometric form. Egyptian art and architecture is controlled and governed by a set of rules. So our authors do a good job of breaking down each term, like form and mass and so on. But they also kind of are preparing you for the rest of the book and the art world, by extension, by explaining where we're going. And Egyptian art and architectural has these set of rules, but you don't need to focus on that so much. What the point is that it's a geometric form, and we talked about this in chapter 1.1. Same principle, a geometric has a right angle for the most part. A sphere is one of those ones that is both organic and geometric, if that makes sense, because spheres occur in nature. There are balls in the world that happen, eggs, so on. But mostly cubes and cylinders and cones and pyramids. Those are usually man-made things, and they are geometric. So geometric and organic forms, again, there's an interactive exercise on Canvas. Same thing. There's more information on the pyramids. So this is a work of art we're going to look at. This is steel, stainless steel. And at the time, we've all seen this sort of texture, and this is basically an angle a grinder set onto the surface of the steel. I see this a lot in elevators that perhaps had graffiti, and then they just kind of grind off that surface. And that pattern is recognizable. But back in 1964, this was groundbreaking. It was super interesting, and it was put into sculpture, not so much just as a surface option for metal. So he was trained as a welder, and he's deciding that going in this minimalist direction of just using man-made materials that came at a supply store for industry, or you could say for building So if you were to walk into a industrial metal supply store, you would get some flat pieces of metal like this, and this is actually hollow. There's all kinds of joints here that you can't really see very well, but he welded these boxes up, and this other interesting form here that's sort of halfway between a sphere and a flat shape. So he's combining these geometric forms, he's using cubes and so on. Thick disk, I guess is the best way to describe that. And he is using diagonals to imply movement, which we talked about in 1.1. Organic forms, so that's irregular and unpredictable. It's usually leaf-like, think about that, but it can be used for expressive effect. So different sculptors will use different geometric forms or organic forms or both. In the case of the figure, whatever we're dealing with the figure, the human figure, that is going to be an organic form, right? The head is rounded, the arms do all kinds of different things, fingers are sort of like long cylindrical things, but they're different than that. They're not strictly made up of hard edge shapes, if that makes sense. Folds in fabric. There's some geometry here around the base of this sculpture, but then we're having back to organic in the flower-like areas. Carved wood piece. So again, the artist is carving the body of Mary and Jesus. Irregular and awkward. Another organic piece that we're going to look at. Batman, which I think is kind of funny. I don't know if this artist just sort of made this piece and called it that. It's kind of amusing. So it's an organic piece. It doesn't have a regular shape. And remember, it's three-dimensional. That's our point here with these two particular pieces. And back here too with our geometric piece. These are three-dimensional pieces. They're not flat drawings. They're not flat anything. They have volume, and they have organic, and they have geometric shapes, okay?